Welcome back, Tigers! In this video, we're going to explore a question we've been getting a lot lately on this channel. Should I be using entry criteria or decision elements in my flows? The answer is the same as any other question in Salesforce development: it depends. We often show you how to create a flow using decision elements, but this may not be the best solution for your particular project. Now, I've been working with flows since the very painful Cloudflow Designer days, and let me tell you, it was rough. This is what flow used to look like. With Salesforce rolling out new features 3 times a year, staying up to date with all of the enhancements to flow is critical. Every release brings changes that can impact how we design and manage automation, so we have to constantly adapt our approach. I've always considered myself a student of flow because every time I use it, I learn something new, and I always ask myself, is this the best way to do this? My approach has evolved over the years based on real-world experience. After working in the same org, some for over 9 years, I've seen firsthand how the approach to flows determines your efficiency and your ability to easily maintain these automations. Sometimes we use entry criteria to control when a flow runs, and other times we skip the entry criteria and rely on decision elements instead. But how do you know which approach is best? By the end of this video, we hope you'll have a clear understanding of when to use each strategy so you can make the right choice for your project. One of the main reasons we sometimes skip entry conditions and go straight to the decision elements is for better manageability and visibility. I've worked in orgs where the opportunity object has 30+ record-triggered flows, and figuring out what's firing and when can be a daunting task. In these cases, managing execution order across multiple automations is pretty tough. Yes, we can control the flow execution order of each individual flow, but sometimes we need more control within each flow. If updates are split in between 2 different flows, we lose that control. By combining flows, we ensure that only 1 flow interview record is created instead of 2, and we can reduce the number of updates on the record, which improves efficiency. Some might argue that we could just adjust the entry criteria instead of using decision elements, but that gets extremely complicated when handling multiple updates in a single flow. It also means that you have to test every update happening within the flow whenever changes are made. By using a decision element instead, we avoid modifying existing logic, reducing the risk of breaking existing automations. Now, of course, on the flip side, entry criteria can improve your performance by preventing unnecessary flow interview executions. A flow only runs if the entry conditions are met, which means fewer flow interviews are consuming system resources. Too many unnecessary flow runs can hit governor limits, slow down other automations, and even cause CPU timeout errors. If you're running into CPU limits, moving logic to entry criteria can help optimize performance. Now let's look at a record-triggered flow on the account object. This particular flow performs 3 different actions. It sends an email to the onboarding team when the account type is updated to customer. It updates contact owners if the account owner changes, and it updates the shipping address from the billing address. Now, we could split this into 3 separate record-triggered flows, but that would add complexity. If we open up the decision elements, we can see a total of 11 different conditions that we would need to handle, all in the entry criteria. While using entry criteria would reduce the number of flow interviews, keeping everything in a single flow gives us better visibility and keeps all smaller updates in one place. However, for larger, more complex processes, we typically use entry criteria and keep the flow focused on that specific business process. Now, here is a good use case for entry conditions in this flow called Opportunity Closed Won Automations. Most Salesforce orgs have a lot of automations that fire when an opportunity is closed won. Setting entry conditions so the flow only runs when a record is updated to meet the criteria prevents unnecessary executions when minor updates to the records happen later. We see this all the time on the opportunity object. If an opportunity is updated after it's closed won, you don't want all those automations firing again. Using entry criteria in this scenario keeps things efficient and easier to manage. Now let's break down the advantages and disadvantages of using entry criteria versus decision elements to help you choose the right approach for your automations. Decision element advantages. They're easier to maintain and modify. A single flow per object keeps all automation logic centralized, making it easier to update and expand the flow. We also see better visibility into the flow execution paths. You can see which records follow which paths directly in the flow debug logs, which is great for tracking complex branching logic. We also have more control over execution order since all of the logic is in one flow. You can control the sequence of actions in a clear and logical way. We can also manage complex logic in fewer executions. We're able to handle logic that is complex or has multiple branching paths in a single execution. A single flow execution handles multiple automations, resulting in more efficiency. Now, decision element disadvantages are there's more complexity in a single flow. A large flow with many decision elements can become harder to navigate. We can mitigate this by using subflows and naming our decision elements really well within the flow, but we also may hit limits in larger orgs. If the flow contains too many decisions, too many actions, it may increase the execution time, causing you to run into the dreaded CPU limit error. If unnecessary flow interviews run, they consume these limits quickly, causing flows to fail unexpectedly. This could also result in a slower user experience. Every flow execution adds processing time, which impacts the speed of the transaction for the user. So let's say a user has a flow that runs every time a user updates the case, even when it doesn't need to. The extra processing time adds 2 to 3 seconds before the record is actually saved. Users experience slower performance and it reduces their productivity. Now let's look at entry criteria advantages. We know performance optimization is one of them. Unnecessary flow interviews are prevented right from the start, reducing execution overhead. This can greatly improve efficiency in high transaction orgs. We also get simpler, smaller flows. Each flow is focused on a single automation, making it easier to test and debug individual automations. We also see faster processing for users. Smaller flows process faster, but if you have a large number of record-triggered flows firing on the same object, this may not be true for you. Now, what are some disadvantages to entry criteria? Well, you may lose control over some execution order. This only applies if you have a flow that contains multiple actions and you want the actions in another flow to occur in between this flow, or if you need to consider the outcome of an action in a flow before you do the next action. It's harder to debug cross-flow behavior whenever we have multiple flows using entry criteria. Debugging becomes difficult if a record is being modified by multiple flows and we're unsure which flow made the change. You really have to go through the debug logs. We also have some field filter availability limitations. We can't reference related record fields or prior values of fields in our entry criteria. We would not be able to check if an account type changed from prospect to customer. We have some visibility and management of updates challenges as well. Understanding all of the actions that occur on a single object is difficult if you have a lot of record-triggered flows on a single object. Updates are more complex because you have to consider the logic for multiple automations if they are in a single flow. The best approach really depends on the situation, which is why we recommend a hybrid approach when building flows. We use before saved flows for same object updates to keep things super efficient. If a process triggers the flow on an object with a lot of automation running, we'll typically use entry criteria to limit when a flow interview record gets created. On the other hand, if we're working with an object that has many smaller automations or needs related record data to control the actions, we'll go with a flow without entry criteria and rely on decision elements to control the logic and the updates. We also make sure to use subflows whenever we see the same actions being repeated across multiple flows. This keeps updates and debugging centralized in one place, making everything more efficient and much easier to manage. There was a time when the Salesforce best practice was to have one record-triggered flow per object, but with the introduction of different flow types, that recommendation has evolved. Now, depending on the object, like accounts or opportunities, you could have a mix of many different types of flows, each serving a very specific purpose. This is a list of types of flows you could expect to see on one of these objects. We have a before save flow that fires on create and update, and there's no entry criteria. We have an after save flow that fires on create and update, and it has no entry criteria either. We may have an after save flow that only fires on create and doesn't have entry criteria. We may have multiple schedule triggered flows with entry criteria. And then we may have some after save flows with entry criteria. And then we should have one single delete before save flow, which fires before delete without entry criteria. That's it. That's a wrap. We hope you gained some valuable insights into the pros and cons between entry criteria and decision elements. Be sure to subscribe to Blue Tiger Academy so you don't miss out on our next videos. Let us know in the comments below if you agree or disagree with any of the points that we made, or if you have any questions. Let us know if you want to see a video on a different Salesforce topic. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.